John, and we started already?
Yeah, we started. Yeah, sorry you didn't hear it.
I didn't hear the music. Okay, John just gave me the signal to get started here, and I'm sitting here ready for the cue, and the cue didn't come through, so I didn't know we had gotten started. Okay, we've gotten started, and we're glad to have you there with us again today at 2 o'clock. This is George Moss at allpointstv.com. in the program called What's Going On, and we come on every Monday from 2 o'clock to 3, and we don't want you to move out of your chair. Don't you dare move. Go to the refrigerator, get anything. We don't take any breaks here, and we're here for the next hour, and we're always glad to have you with us, and glad to have all of the technicians here doing their job.
I'm going to see if they can.
And the other ones, if they ever look good on the camera, it's because the cameras are far back enough. Don't pick my image up too closely.
Well, you're actually pretty close in here.
Don't see all of the flow. I don't wear any makeup.
Actually, I have it pretty close to you.
Those on allpointstv.com, we're glad to have you, and also on 92.1 WFOV, we're very glad to have you as well as our partners here, and we are going to have you with us for the first 26 minutes before taking a break, after which you'll come back after 4 minutes, and we will apprise you of where we've been during the 4 minutes of your absence and bring you up to speed.
Can you hear me now?
I want to thank all of the ones who are paying attention to what we do here at allpointstv.com and 92.1, because these are quality programs that you have on the air. I am on this other program they have on 92.1, the Tom Summers Show, and they do a very good job. They come on 5 days a week from 9 o'clock until 12, and they replay their program at 9 o'clock each of the weekday nights, and that's a quality program. Hope you'll tune that program in as well. All the programs here at allpointtv.com are to be tuned in, and stay tuned for the latest of all of these programs, because each one is bringing something very exciting and something very new. I was going to come in and challenge John today, but I don't think I will. I was going to ask John some questions here about the Constitution, and he is normally up to speed, but I don't know if I can trip him up today or not. But I'm going to ask this question. In Article 1, Section 8, which has 18 clauses to it, it says the Congress shall have power, and then it will delegate or enumerate those powers. Okay, that's leading up to my question.
Can you hear me now?
And then going back, I'm going to ask you a question here, John, and see if you got it down to a science. Just now, I want to ask you a question.
Can you hear me though? Can you hear me?
Do you have the your?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I'm not hearing you that well.
Okay, turn it up. Can maybe reach up there and
you hear me through
I can
the
hear you
channel
fine.
here?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, I'm not picking up as well in the studio here, but if you can hear me, I want to get an answer to this question. In the preamble to the Constitution, it says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." So I'm going to ask this $64,000 question. There's no payout. Who wants to be a millionaire? We're not paying any money out in that realm either. Nobody's going to get rich on the question, but want to see if you got the answer. When they're doing the enumeration of powers and the delegation of powers, John, who's the one doing the delegation here?
Was it the people? The people?
Say it again, because I'm not.
Yeah, see, turn your microphone up. I mean,
What should I turn your headphones.
Oh, I got to turn this up. Yeah, turn your headphones up.
Okay,
yeah.
hold on.
Yeah,
I can do that.
Because I know I'm hearing myself through the speaker.
Yeah, okay, fine.
Can you hear myself? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay.
We got Verizon here.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Yeah, see, okay. The way that's worded, I think that would be the people delegating the power.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why, because it's got to be everything that they're granted. You know, that's the premise. Everything that the Congress has
I cannot trip this guy up.
granted
I
is the
don't care
people.
what I ask. I cannot trip this guy up. He is always, John, I didn't know. I couldn't figure out why I wasn't hearing you, and I didn't think about tuning the sound volume up. Here I am, the dunce cap of the studio. That's why we have technicians here. If they had to come in here and do the technical work, we would never get on the air.
And a lot of times I'm just guessing at it because I mean it's like sometimes I'll have everything working and I'll come back the next day, start it up, and it's like something screwed up on it, and I didn't change anything, so it's like there's like gremlins screwing with the equipment.
Yeah, well, you technicians, you all have everything working when I come in here because I don't have anything working. I come in here with the notes. And the technical parts, I leave to technical staff, and they do a brilliant job here. If I had to do the technical part, folks, we would not be on the air at any point during the season.
I have a lot of help, though. I do. If there's something stymies me, I got 2 or 3 people I go to, and if they're stymied, then we're really messed up. I have to start over
again. John, you're doing a good job, and I think we ought to bring you before the camera sometime and let the people see. People say, he's always talking to this one guy off the air, and he calls him John. They never see you, so I do want them to know that there is a person named John Wilson here.
I got the face for radio, though. See, that's what it is. I got the face for radio.
Okay, John gave the answer. I was trying to stop him again. I don't know why I waste my time, but the people are the ones that are authorizing. They are actually delegating the powers that are being given to accruing powers to the federal government, and they are the ones who are saying, as we the people trying to form a more perfect union, in order to do that, we are assigning more power to the federal government because under the Articles of Confederation that were invoked in 1781, that just didn't work out too well. 5 years later, we had the Shays Rebellion that occurred in Massachusetts, and we found out that we had so debilitated the federal government, out of a fear of what had been faced during the time the 13 states were under King George III, and the strong central power that was delegated, the powers he delegated to himself pretty much, and that power that was rested in the Parliament. They wanted to restrict that, and they had done such a restrictive job of it that they had debilitated the federal government, so that when there was a state rebellion, the federal government was so weakened it could not respond to it. Now they realize they got a problem, and they are meeting in Philadelphia, with the idea of this problem in the back of their mind. They're meeting there the following year. The Shays Rebellion would have occurred in 1786. And now they're meeting in Philadelphia in 1787. They're meeting there on June the 25th. They're invoking the convention during the time of September the 17th, June 25th, 1787. And that convention is going to go on from June 25th of that year until September the 17th. And they're putting together something that would, at the same time, give more power to the federal government, restricted under the Articles, but giving more power to the federal government under the Constitution. At the same time, trying to do, under these terms, constitutional terms, what had been done under the Articles, to, on the one hand, in one breath, to extend more power to the federal government, at the same time restrict its ability to go out of control, which was a fear they had, and why they had written the Articles of Confederation up as they had when they drew those 13 clauses up in that particular document. But they're still trying to work on how to do both at the same time, talking out of, in a sense, out of both sides of the mouth at the same time. How do you do that in terms of delegating more power, and at the same time working on the fear that you don't want the central power to go out of control? And so they found a way in order to do that, and the way they came up with a way of rendering, in a sense, that which belonged to Caesar, delegating powers to Caesar, in a sense, that which belongs to Caesar, you delegate it to Caesar, and that which does not belong to Caesar, you don't want Caesar to assume that particular power realm, and therefore it was the allocation of power on the federal level within the three branches of government, not to have it concentrated in one domain, but put it in three different corridors, and have each of them to check on the power of the other one by assuming certain authority within his own realm and being jealous of that authority, and then taking that jealousy and then applying it to how the other two branches will in fact import their own vested part of the federal structure. The legislative branch could be checked on by the executive with the veto power of the legislation passed by the legislative branch of government, and the court could then assume the authority to check on the constitutionality of that which is passed by the legislative branch of government and that which is enforced by the president. So the check and balance system was put in place, and the powers being separated, that was another way of restraining the federal government. And you would have the promise, and there was a promise when they ratified this document in 1788. There was a promise that they would add into it another concern of those that were the people that were concerned about a Bill of Rights, something that would further check and restrain the federal authority by putting a Bill of Rights in there that would specifically spell out what were the rights of the American people. John said correctly that the people are the ones who are delegating the powers, and that is what is stating in the preamble, we the people. But the first way in which it was written was we the states. We the states of the United States. And so in a sense, both answers would be right. The people and the states are delegating the powers to the federal government. In other words, the people and the states are to be the masters of the federal government, not the other way around, in which it is now being imported today. We have the federal government doing the dictatorial things in terms of dictating to the states. But that was not the intent. The intent was that the states would be the ones that would dictate. And we see that in terms of where it would go once you have done the proposing of the Constitution. Guess where it goes for the persons to endorse it? Or I should say, where does it go from there in terms of the endorsement of the work that had been done in Philadelphia between June 25th and September 17th? Where does it go from there? It doesn't go to the federal government because the federal government is yet to be created. Where does it go? It goes to the states, because once they have done their work in Philadelphia, they have to now go before the people and to explain to them what it was they did in their room, because not all the people are there. 55 persons are in their room, or will be the ones in that room at the end of the process, because some of them have gone home. They didn't think that there was anything of any kind of significance was going to come out of this convention, and so some of them left, but 55 of them stayed there, and they did some work that had never been done before in the history of the world. I mean, what they came up with is a document that's been copied everywhere where there is constitutionalism anywhere on the planet. It starts in that room in 1787. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is because I am doing another piece on these people meeting and tearing down these monuments. And I'm going to continue to talk about this until we get this noise. Is really nothing but noise. People do not know the history of the country. They don't understand the history, and therefore they're out there in the street as useful idiots.
I'd like to know this. The left always wants to say that they always want to point out the ancestral sins of our country and how we should all, especially the whites, should all feel this. You know, they're going to, if they eliminate all these monuments and stuff like that, aren't they kind of biting themselves in the butt? Because basically they're going to turn around and now who are they going to point to being the bad guy? They can't point that anymore because they're all gone. You know what I mean? That's
true too. And the question is, you know, once you start doing what is the equivalent of book burning, This is the equivalent of book burning. These people remind me of the brown shirts to me, they're mini-me Mussolinis, to me, hiding their own fascism behind their grievance. And the grievance is that these monuments symbolize, we're talking about Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis and some of those persons, Johnson, Stonewall Jackson, these figures, that they do not understand that these are not persons that are fighting for the maintenance of slavery. They're fighting against federal tyranny. This is a secessionist struggle that is going on. And there are people, and I'm going to talk about that later on in terms of where this comes from, that this war was over slavery. I would reject that notion, but I want you to know where it comes from, and I will tell you where it comes from, which I don't think anybody is pointing this out. But I will mention the name of the person where that particular understanding of the Civil War, so-called Civil War, came from by a person that was born in 1848, James Ford Rhodes, who was born 17 years before the so-called Civil War, and will become later on a very wealthy industrialist in the coal, iron, and steel industry, and it made a fortune by the time he was 37 years old, and retired from the industry in 1885. And because he was such a brilliant person, and I do not take anything away from his brilliance, to achieve what he did at 37 years of age. But I think it's significant that he was 17 years old at the time that Lincoln was assassinated, and would have been born into the myths that were being created. And later on, after he had retired from the industrial realm in 1885, will begin to take his brilliant mind and then operate as a historian, or in my view, a pseudo-historian, although he wrote some remarkable works, a 7-volume work between 1893 and 1906, 7 volumes, and did an eighth volume on the Civil War. And it's out of his realm that he's going to come with this idea that the single reason why the Civil War the so-called Civil War was fought was over slavery. He singularized it to that particular, view. And we've been following James Ford Rhodes' idea ever since, and we're still on that view. But and his book, by the way, the one he wrote on the Civil War, was the second book to get a Pulitzer Prize for writing. And I consider that, I read his book, I consider that to be a endorsement because of what he wrote. It's well written too. Now, I'm not taking anything from him, but it is also within the religiosity of the Lincoln myth, the myth of Abraham Lincoln. I think if he had written the same book but outside the realm of what is acceptable folklore, that's what the Lincoln myth is really about, is a folklore. I don't know if he would have been the second person to get a Pulitzer Prize for writing that book, but that's what he got when that book came out. And we've been pretty much mimicking and parroting his view ever since. And I do admit his brilliance, but I do not agree with his conclusion.
I'm going to throw you a curveball, though. Okay. Maybe you're not prepared for it. Maybe you want to.
I will be prepared for it.
Okay.
It's in history.
So it's this, in the Civil War. I can see where people say it wasn't fought over the issue of slavery alone. Okay, but it's safe the Civil War had not been fought. What we call the Civil War had not been fought. Where do you think slavery would have ended? I mean, do you think it would have ended? Do you think how would it end?
It would have ended as it ended in all the other places where it was being practiced, which is worldwide. See, we have to go back and read about the real story of slavery. The best treatise on it that I've read, and I read a lot of the treatises, but the best one I read is the one written by Thomas Sowell. Sowell has a chapter starting on page 111 of his book, chapter 4, of the book called Black Rednecks and White Liberals. In chapter 4 of that book, Sowell titles that chapter "The Real Story of Slavery," and he says in that chapter that we have never looked at any other issue that is of an epidemic proportion in such provincial terms. What he means by that is that we look at a universal practice. If you had, let's say, some worldwide, let's say malaria. Malaria would be something that happened on the world stage. You would never provincialize it and say then it only occurred in one place on the planet. You would say that malaria has been universal. But when it comes to slavery, it is viewed as being provincial. In other words, it only happened in the West, it only happened here, and it has to do with the United States, Western Hemisphere, thank you, John, Western Hemisphere, and with Western Europe. We don't think of it in terms of its application elsewhere. And the premise of that is only in terms of blacks and whites where this horrid practice has known in existence, and its existence is in those territorial boundaries, nowhere else. When the fact is that slavery is just like any other epidemic in this realm, a sociological epidemic, not a medical epidemic, but one that is universal nevertheless, and is looked at in provincial terms, and those terms are incorrect. So to the question of where would it have gone, it would have gone where it went in other parts of the world. It went the way of the wind, because except in specific locations, and I will make this point as well, that slavery has never left the world. It has always been in the world and has never left the world once it was in fact invoked. It was invoked because people found a way of making use of other person's labor and taking advantage of it to their own benefit through the exploitation of other persons, making use of other people's labor to their own benefit of another group. They've always had that in the world, and once it was invoked in the world, it has never left the world. But you don't hear about it because it is not practiced in the places where we're looking for it. We look for it in the West, and we think that if it does not exist in the West, it doesn't exist anywhere. Or maybe the other side is true, that if it doesn't exist in the West, nobody worries about it existing, because we have a double standard. We have one standard for the West. We have another standard for those that's not in the West. We have slavery in Africa right now. In Mauritania, in Sudan, Mauritania on the west coast of Africa, and we have it on the east coast in Sudan. Sudan now is 2 countries, but in Sudan you have slavery. Nobody is raising any questions about it. Just like they have no question about the racism in South Africa now that apartheid has ended. But there's still racism in South Africa now. The racism that's being imported by the blacks in South Africa. Nobody is raising that question. I'm raising it because if you have one standard, then anybody and one principle, anyone that violates the principle, that's a violation of the principle.
Yeah, I mean, they appeal to absolute morality when they make a case against somebody being exploited or whatever. But then again, once somebody gets power, they tend to forget that they have to also have that same standard in place for themselves, and they have to live by that. See, and moral relativism simply doesn't work, and I don't care what people say. And that's, to me, this kind of instance right here is a case for absolute morality.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you can't just say, well, perspective of this, well, let's face it, nobody wants to be enslaved. That's a universal. I don't think anybody would say, yeah, I like being a slave. Or my you know, I don't understand that.
My criticism of it would be universal. And the people who are criticizing this view are the ones that want to particularize it. That is, they can see the speck in somebody else's eye and cannot see the log in their own. And I want to see the speck and the log, and everywhere where the principle, the principle of denigrating human worth, wherever it occurs, then we're going to critique it, and we're going to bring it out into open. There are no sacred cows here, and we have to understand that wherever there is a violation of the principle, human rights principle, then that violation has to be excoriated.
We're going to break right now, and you know, please stick around, WFOV listeners.
Okay, and want to welcome them back in 4 minutes. I know they'll be gone for their own breaks during the time that there'll be a way we'll go here with our program here at allpointstv.com, and we're very glad to have them come back in 4 minutes. Those of you who are with us on the other network, stay tuned. We're not going anywhere. We're just simply waiting for the commercial breaks to take place with the other listeners. And I want to thank 92.1 again for being a partner here at allpointstv.com. Okay, well, we are back again, and we were just simply making the point that there's more to the story of slavery than what has met the eye, because we do not really want to judge out of one standard. But if you have one standard, then it's wrong in its application in this particular realm in the Western world, and it's also wrong in the Eastern part of the world where it was the forerunner. Well, slavery has been universal, but in terms of it being an internationalized slave trade kind of situation, that would be an Eastern phenomenon before it was a Western phenomenon. Although you slave the ones around you, the international aspect of it, where you're now going outside of your own particular geographical parameter, the boundary lines where you are, into other arenas, that phenomenon really starts in the Eastern part of the world, where the Arabs, in terms of Africa, the Arab slave trade. And nobody seems to know anything about that slave trade, but that slave trade was a forerunner by at least 700 years of the slave trade that occurred in terms of Europe. The slave trade Europe was involved in as far as internationalizing the slave trade. That slave trade would not have started until 1441, 1444. But in terms of the Arab slave trade, that slave trade starts in Africa around, I would say, 639. And until it was stopped as it began to expand, going even up into Europe, until it was stopped in its expansion at the Battle of Tours in 632 in the Pyrenees Mountains in between Spain and France. That expansion was going to go into Europe, where you had also the enslavement of Europeans. We don't want to talk about that as far as that is concerned, because we want to racialize it, where it only happened to a specific group as its victims and a single group as the victimizer of those victims. But that is not the story of slavery. That's a story of them segregating slavery into a phenomenon that takes place in a single part of the world when it was all over the world. And how would it have gone away here? Without the so-called Civil War, it would have gone away here the same way it went away in every other place where it is now absent. And what destroyed it primarily was the technologies put in place and the capitalism that brought it to an end. In other words, I'll be quoting here Charles Beard's idea. So I was talking before we went to the break on James Ford Rhodes, and we're glad to have you coming back. Those from 92.1, glad to have you back. What I'm saying here now is that in the first part of the program, I was talking about James Ford Rhodes and his influence, and how we see the so-called Civil War. Rhodes was 17 years old at the time that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. So he would have been coming up at a time when the Lincoln myths are being created and would have been somewhat guided in his view based upon this changing of how Lincoln was viewed based on his martyrdom, as he was assassinated April the 14th, 1865, dying the next day. And so I think that would have had a tremendous impact upon for Rhodes's idea about Lincoln. And when he wrote about it in terms of the Civil War, the so-called Civil War, because we haven't had a Civil War in this country. We've had 2 wars of secession in this country. He had one in 1776, and we had successfully, by the way, prosecuted, took 7 years to bring it to a close, where the secession was in fact successful in 1783 with the signing of the Treaty of Paris in that year. In the War of Secession in 1861, there's been called a Civil War, but it's not a Civil War. It is a secession war in the same spirit of the war that was fought in 1776, and for the same reason. See, I not only disagree with Rhodes in part, but I disagree with Rhodes in the totality of his argument. This war is not over slavery. In fact, if the South had not succeeded from the Union, their slavery would have been fine. And I have no other document to point to better than and higher than the document which is found in Lincoln's own inaugural address, March the 4th, 1861. And I suggest some people that disagree with me on this point go back and read the document. He doesn't mention in that inaugural address the Corwin Amendment. Corwin was a congressman from Ohio who, in order to bring the South back into the Union, because by December states were leaving the Union, and when Lincoln gave his inaugural address, which was March the 4th, 1861, that's when he gave his first inaugural address, and gave his second one March the 5th, 1865. That's the one in which Oates, the dishonest historian Oates, is quoting from that speech, the last paragraph in it, when he titles his book "With Malice Toward None." This is a dishonest book, by the way, because With Malice Toward None is after the war has come to a close, and there are 600,000 persons have lost their lives, and now this man writing a book talking about With Malice Toward None, and there are 600,000 people dead. I guess you kill people without malice.
Now, a point I'd like to ask you too is like the bringing in of slaves, or the importation. You know, it sounds really cold saying that way. Had ended in what, 1801, 1802 already, hadn't it been?
The importation of slavery, the Constitution was Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution says that the importation of slavery could not be ended for the next 20 years, which means then from 1787 to 1807, there could be no prohibition passed by Congress that would have ended the importation of slaves in this country legally. But in 1808, the year in which they could in fact do it, there was a law passed by Congress to in fact ban slaves coming from outside the country within the country itself. So the importation of slavery was prohibited by a law passed by Congress in 1808, at the time that Thomas Jefferson was president of the United States.
Because I was
that importation of slavery would be forbidden.
I thought that occurred sooner, and I forgot about that. Is that being written into the Constitution? Yeah. Basically, like a phasing out period.
Yeah. In other words, it is what Douglas John. Another very important part of this is the argument that went on between William Lloyd Garrison, the great abolitionist who founded the paper called the Liberator in 1831, and the argument he had with the great Frederick Douglass, who would set up his own paper in 1847 called the North Star. That falling out that they had basically was over the fact that Douglass did not see the Constitution the same way William Lloyd Garrison saw it. Garrison saw the Constitution as a slave endorsement document. Douglass did not see it that way. For the first part of Douglass's abolitionist career, he saw it through the same lens as William Lloyd Garrison, his mentor, because he had not read it for himself. However, when Douglass founded the North Star, he went to read the document on his own. And he fell out with William Lloyd Garrison because now here's Douglass has his own view because he read the document. And what Douglass saw in such parts of the Constitution as Article 1, Section 9 that allowed for slavery, importation of slaves to be prohibited after a certain period of time had passed. Why? Because you have to give something in compromise to the slave states. And so they did that. But see, underneath that, there's a voice that's been missed by these historians. Underneath the voice is that what happened when they made the compromise? I asked this question to a lot of historians when I was at the university in our private chat. What happens when you make a compromise? Well, you make a compromise and you keep fighting for your position. You don't change your mind because you made a compromise. You make a compromise and continue to fight until your position prevails, or see if it can prevail. And so they compromise on the slave trade, for example. At the same time, look at what happened on the other side of it. There's a part in the Constitution where it allows the slave trade to continue, but also it gives a formula for the slave trade to come to a close in a future date. Well, the ones that are sitting at the table are not worried about the future date. They're worried about making some restitution of the issue as it relates to right now. That's when the compromise is being made. Let the forebears of that group, the generation that will precede it, let them deal with it at that point. But at this point, we're making a deal to bring about the inception of the country itself. But underneath there, there's another voice there. And that's the voice that Douglass is saying. And this man had never gone to school, by the way, and he's able to discern, and maybe because he had not gone to school, he's able to discern that. But he and Garrison are going to fall out.
I'll tell you what, the bulk of American college students, when they sit in a history class, they sit in a philosophy class. I raise my hand and say, I admit to myself doing this. When I was in a philosophy class, I didn't take a position counter to the professors because I knew it was an uphill battle.
Yeah.
What I did is basically reword what they said, maybe try and then give it back to them because that's what they want. They're enamored with their own voices.
More so now than it was when the conservatives were on the campus, because now they will penalize you for even raising the question in the classroom, because you're not supposed to have a counterpoint. And the ones that are graduating out of the schools, they don't have a counterpoint. They don't allow you to come on those college campuses. People that are coming on there to speak, and culture, and conservatives coming on there, they don't allow that. There's a single voice that's allowed on the college campuses today.
They want faces that are different color. They want different hairstyles. They want different ethnic groups. That's diversity. But they want everybody to have the same mindset. They can't tolerate diversity of thought.
Yeah.
They just want, they don't want to homogenize white faces on campus, but they want the browns and yellows and all that and the reds and whatever. But
that's right.
But no, you got to be all lockstep with the same things.
Yeah, John. They've even had days in which whites are to be banned off the college campus. That's not diversity in terms of on the other side of it. They want to say diversity, and it's always about black and brown and red and yellow. I mean, I used to hear the song called "Red and Yellow, Black and White. They are precious in His sight." That's what I was raised on. That all the groups are equal members of the human family.
See, I'm a conservative, and I mean, I get tired of hearing people complain about something that happened way before they were born and bringing that grievance with such bitterness into the present, like as that they experienced themselves. But I always allow for people to talk about why they're angry, and even, let's face it, this is right now what's going on here is an extraordinary level of acting ability to have this much rage over something you personally didn't experience. I think that's amazing that how they would channel their ancestors or somebody else's ancestors. I think that's just bizarro.
Yeah, it's amazing, and it can be explained by the fact that the country has made so much progress. In other words, this country has made so much progress in the racial arena that we now have to go back and pick on dead people in order to find grievance. Because when you start talking about what it is going on right now that is prohibiting people from going forward based on some legal impediments, we haven't had that, and we haven't had it since approximately around the time period in which black people started voting in the South. In other words, when when King was successful in the successful movement that he led from 1955 to I'm going to say from 1955 to 1965, although I know King was assassinated April the 4th, 1968. But I would say the civil rights movement was pretty much over in 1965, because it's in that year where the ballot was given to, when the ballot was now being enforced of the blacks that were in the South at that time. And by having the ballot and having the Democrats being able to take the credit for the balloting of blacks in the South, since Johnson was president at that time, having signed the bill into law that was a voting rights bill at that time, because the Democrats, the president at that time, they can claim that they were in fact doing it, although the ones that had passed it in the House and Senate were the Republicans. But who's paying attention to that? The fact is that the ones that were more visible was the President of the United States. And when he signed the law, then the Democrats in the South that were abhorrent about blacks voting can now back off somewhat, and that voting would now be allowed. And what did black people do? They went to the polls and did what Johnson said they were going to do. Where he said they would be voting for Democrats for the next 200 years. And he wasn't nice about it either. Called them the N-word and said they'd be voting for Democrats for the next 200 years. And so far, that's been proven true. 90% of the blacks vote for Democrats because they do not really understand the history in back of that in terms of what party was keeping from voting in the first place.
Charles Barkley once said, or he said a couple of times, I mean, you got the poor people been voting for Democrats for 65, 70 years and you're still poor. I mean, and I don't think he's like this great stellar political thinker, but he just makes an observation.
He's an honest man.
Yeah, he's honest. And
he's a very honest person, and he's very independent in his thought, and I have a lot of respect for people like that. People like Charles Barkley, and even Jim Brown, by the way. Jim Brown came out. These people are kneeling when they're playing the national anthem. By the way, the NFL is going to take a position against it financially for commercial reasons, because what is happening there is that the people aren't showing up in the stadium. Have you been reading about this, John? That people are not coming to the football games.
See, here's the thing. I'm going to step out here. I love this country, all that. I'm patriotic, and I'll say that. But I think you insert politics in the middle of a sporting event by the beginning of a sporting event by doing that, and I don't know. That's what I don't see. If that's going to be if that's an issue, I never knew why it's going to be an issue, but I always had a problem with that too. Like the Pledge of Allegiance, I like the flag. I like the flag itself, but swearing allegiance to it, I think that's kind of weird, because the politicians are the ones who are supposed to swear allegiance to follow the Constitution, yet they disregard that at all times. We're pretty much powerless. We can have our own problems or whatever, but we're pretty much powerless to actually do anything against the Republic. I know, really, in that measure, we swear allegiance to the flag or the Republic, but we already are pretty much. It'd be shooting ourselves in the foot to do anything contrary to the betterment of the Republic. But
they're taking that position against the country based upon the past of the country. So what is the country supposed to do? Disavow itself in terms of canceling out everything that it stands for? We stand for everything that has happened is the country's heritage.
See, they're using a Alinsky approach, though. They're trying to personalize it and demonize it. So they're demonizing now the country, and anybody else who has issues with them not feeling so patriotic, they're the wrong person. They're the wrong thinking people. So I mean, they're using a Alinsky approach. They're actually making you doubt yourself. You doubt your own country's abilities to overcome obstacles, and which already we demonstrated.
I would take some exception to anyone that is teaching these children to disavow the country that they're going to grow up in and that they're going to be the inheritors of, to teach them a disrespect for that inheritance. I think that is unconscionable and unforgivable.
So I think they're going to be, let's face it, liberals do things all the time that I just sit back and mock. Like, they're pro-abortion. and they're, I mean, almost like they want to see every pregnancy in an abortion. What if it's them and they're seeking an abortion? I'm not going to stop them, because my adage is never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. And I guess think about it. The conservatives should just let them go on and get aborted, because now you don't have to deal with their brats in the future. That's why I look at it. You don't have to have these people clamoring for more stuff from your paycheck. I mean, so I mean, go ahead, have the abortion. I mean, I'm supposed to weep over that? I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, people have wept enough. The anti-abortion movement. And I think they're in the more moral position. But if they want to have an abortion, by all means, have one. They're still available. And guess what? It means now you don't have to suffer that miserable life you think is going to be with children, having kids. And now we don't have to pay for your kid in the future. And now we can actually have more of a stable society. So you do yourself in. Fine. I'm not going to argue against that. I mean, that's real cynical, but that's why I see it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, John and I disagree on that point there. I come down on the on the side of the Declaration of Independence, the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and that you have the right to your own sovereignty, and that sovereignty starts at inception. But I do understand the other point.
You got me with that point. You did get me with that. But I just say cynically, okay, go have an abortion. I don't have to put up with your kid in the future. That's why I look at it.
Yeah, the people that are running this country, the people that would endorse things like Roe v. Wade, they are following in the footsteps of Abraham Lincoln, in my view, in terms of abrogating our documents in this country. Roe v. Wade is in direct contradiction to one of the founding documents of the United States of America. We have the Declaration of Independence, where we declared independence. And in declaring our independence from Great Britain, we also declared some other things as well. We declared that all men are created equal. Does not mean they're equally yoked in society, but the creation is equal, and therefore that in that egalitarianism that's in the creative process. You see, we're talking about, everybody want to talk about the political aspect. Okay, that's a different thing. We're talking about the creativeness of that. All men and women, we'll add women here. We'll do an addendum to Jefferson's words. All men, all women are created equal. We're talking here about the inception, and because they are created equal, can grow up and be unequal because they're, the amount of effort is different. The stations in which people arrive, that will be different. The assignment of certain things that happen on the other side of their birth, that will be different. The parents they're born into, they're not the same. But in terms of the creation, this is what Jefferson's talking about. All men, and I'll say women, are created equal. That they are endowed, meaning that they are created and they are endowed at creation with certain rights. Jefferson called them unalienable rights that cannot be abrogated. In other words, if you're born with these rights, they're God-given, and therefore what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. So the right to life, the right to liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These were fundamental rights. Abrogated by, these rights were abrogated and torn up and destroyed by this outrageous government, the tyranny. That's tyranny. The tyranny that was opposed in 1861. That's why I disagree with James Ford Rhodes. I'm arguing with these scholars. I know all the scholars, read their books, and we are in disagreement, and we're going to continue to be in disagreement until they yield. I'm not yielding because I'm right. And they're wrong.
See, I heard that said all the time about Obama, and he was like, "Oh, he's a constitutional expert." He teaches.
My foot.
It's like, yeah. I tell you what, I would have loved to have you and him on the same stage arguing the Constitution.
No contest.
I would have loved to see it. I mean, they would be so angry. The left would be so angry because you would outstrip them on that.
Yeah. Look, let's get real here. Let's get real here. Obama is not a constitutional scholar. And there's no evidence of it. This is a claim that's made in his name, of which there is absolutely zero evidence. In fact, when you look at his understanding of the Constitution, if he understood it, would have followed it, and he didn't follow it. Didn't do it for 8 years, and he's out here trying to do things as an extraterritorial president, where he's trying to run the country from behind the scenes, and that's not a respect of the Constitution. Those who understand the Constitution will respect it, and I do respect it, and I respect it because I understand it. And I understand in the same way that Douglas understand, the same way that Douglas understood it. Douglas was born into slavery, by the way. And he was born in 1818, although he thought he was born in 1817. Douglas was born in 1818, died in 1895, 78 years old when he died. And this man had never set a foot in a classroom and was one of the most astute scholars of the Constitution. He was more of a scholar than Obama was of the Constitution, and he was more of a scholar than William Lloyd Garrison of the Constitution, having discerned. And I said earlier, this is why he and Garrison fell out, because Garrison in 1851 had put a requirement upon papers. Douglas had his own paper called the North Star, and he'll set up another paper in 1851, by the way, and that's because of his falling out with Garrison, because Garrison had put out a notice that anyone that wants to have the American Slavery Society's endorsement of the newspaper must take a position that the Constitution is a slave document because of his recognition of slavery. This was Garrison's position. You know what Douglas wrote to Garrison in terms of Garrison saying he can only endorse the papers that would take that position? Douglas wrote and said that he would not be able to be endorsed under those terms because he disagreed. And now, because he's not being endorsed by the American Slavery Association, which is one of the sponsors of the paper, the fact that the readership was based upon the anti-slavery movement and all of that, since Douglas was an abolitionist, when he disavowed that position, they stopped supporting Douglas. That's why Douglas had to change the name of his paper. And in 1851, when he took that position, Douglas, the North Star fell. And now Douglas has a paper called Fred Douglass's paper. That's why that paper name was changed. But Douglas was right and Garrison was wrong. And I'm right and James Ford Rhodes is wrong.
Well, how can Garrison argue against that when you just could so easily point out that that phasing out codicil in the Constitution? How could he sit there and maintain that position that it was pro-slavery when it's obvious that they had intentions of seeing it end at some point?
Because John, sometimes you're blinded by the obvious, and sometimes you're blinded by your own prejudice. Because it endorses the institution, it already existed. So not to endorse it, how are you going to get Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina? How are you going to get Virginia to, and Virginia is a very important state because it is a state that gave us 4 of our first 5 presidents. Look at that history out of Virginia. George Washington. Virginia is very important. You're not going to have a United States, all these states being sovereign, independent, and really their own, these are nations coming together. They're not coming together to give their sovereignty to disavow the things they stand for when they're out there as separate units. How are you going to get them to come in and join into the United States? The e pluribus unum, the e pluribus unum, which is it does not mean out of many people one. It means out of many countries. These are 13 countries, 13 nations, and they're coming together to form the United States. These are 13 separate states coming together to form the United States. E pluribus unum. That's what that stands for. I don't care what the scholars are saying. I'm telling you the truth. And how are you going to bring that about? Virginia is very important. And how do we know it's important? Look at the fact that Virginia is critical to the foundation of the nation. In fact, the South is critical. Because I hate to tell you this, because you're not going to accept it because of the brainwashing that goes on in these universities by these scholars that want parrots, that they want to create parrots rather than thinkers. I'm not a parrot, and I want these scholars to come in. I wish they would come on my post. They send their students on there. You come on there. Don't send those lightweights on there. You're the one making the claim. I don't follow Rose. I understand what Rose wrote, and I respect his brilliance. The second person to get a Pulitzer Prize for writing. He was the second one, but he was wrong. His premise is wrong. The one that had it right was Charles Beard. Beard wrote a book called The Economic Interpretation of the Constitution, and he understood the economics of it. He also understood the economics between the sectionalism between the agrarian South and the industrial North. He understood that. What Rose didn't understand, Rose began to write his books starting with the history of the 1850s, because that's when he saw the crisis developing in the country. From the 1850s, and he was writing to about 1906. Let's see, Rose died in, let's see, 1927. And you're going to see that I'm right in that. John, hold that sign up again. Okay, so we have about 2 minutes here. John lets me know exactly when I need to shut up. But what I'm saying here is that we have got to understand the documents of this country. We're going to lose this country if we don't become more aware of what it is that we were in fact given by the framers. We are the progenitors. We are the descendants of the framers who passed down this marvelous system, and we've got to hold on to it, understand it. Okay, got to get out of here. Ran over time. Want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.